Guest today is Fredrick Niles. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Fredrick, and how you got started in horror.
Yeah, I name is Fredrick Niles. I write sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, and I would say that horror has its fingers in all of those proverbial genre pies. Um, I I didn't really start out writing horror. I call myself the accidental horror writer because I started out writing fantasy. I just wanted to write fantasy in a modern setting.
Yeah.
But as I was, writing these stories and writing the characters in them and their reactions to fantastic happenings in a modern world, I realized that our modern sensibilities don't jive super well with that, and the outcomes ended up being very dark and violent and that sort of thing.
Brilliant. So what drew you to the horror genre specifically? What was it that sort of like enticed you?
Yeah, so I I would say that as a kid, I often watched X Files with my mom when my dad was gone on the road, and that had a pretty significant effect on me, I think. But I also watched a lot of like Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection on like the FX channel.
Yeah.
They never played the good movies, the good Alien movies there. They only had the bad ones. But I enjoyed them nonetheless, and I think that was a foundational moment
Yeah.
for me. But that kind of led me more to seek out the Dark Horse comics and the Bantam novels that were published in those universes, and that kind of reignited my love for reading that had been pretty well snubbed out by just your classical public education. um, so yeah, I would owe a lot to those early kind of expanded universe. Um, the Alien books, the Resident Evil books, that sort of stuff when I was in middle school.
Brilliant. So how do you get your ideas?
Yeah, so most of my ideas come from a pretty simple setup, which is um, a normal everyday person finds themselves dropped into a folk tale or a fairy tale or something like that, and all sorts of uh, terrible things ensue from there. Usually, it's some fairy tale trope or something that I'm wrapped up in at the moment that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
I also have a kind of a fascination with cults. I think that cult novels are pretty cool. Also, cult shares an origin with the word culture, so I'm interested in how our own cultish tendencies as modern people rear their heads in our everyday lives when we think that we're beyond such things. In an example is my wife was in a gift shop recently. She was telling me she was in a gift shop and came across all these beautiful ornate candles that you might find in like a Catholic home or something. But when she looked closer, it was like Taylor Swift and Beyonce and all of these
Yeah.
like pop culture figures. And that was probably done as like a gag or meant to be ironic. But that is how we engage with these figures. We sacrifice our time and our money and our attention and basically elevate them to godhood, I think.
Yeah, we do. Especially the teenage girls with the
Oh,
boy.
for sure. Yep. Yeah. Well, I certainly had my own kind of celebrity fixations at that age too. So, yep, definitely not immune to it.
Yeah, I'm not experienced with boys getting a fixation. I have a couple of teenage girls, and they were over the hills for who was it now? JLS and Take That, and there was another one as well.
Yeah, it's I don't yeah, boys do have that kind of interest, but girls, it's on a different level.
Yeah.
I think teenage girls, there's that can't be topped. It's for sure.
So how do you go about creating a realistic character?
So most of my characters are, I would say, drawn from just observation of the people around me and my own life experience and stuff like that. And you go into a book with this idea that here are the characters, here's what they want, here's how they act, and here's kind of generally how the book is laid out. But I think if you're treating your characters with respect, they'll surprise you at times, to the point where you actually have to start changing where you thought the novel was going. And yeah, I think that's the main thing. Realistic characters kind of have these lives of their own, and you can't. You have to be a little bit flexible with the story when it comes to them, if you're going to be genuine.
Yeah. Do you base them on, I know you said you base them on some of your own experiences, but do you put your own fears in there as well?
Yeah, definitely. I have a young daughter, and we're having another young daughter here soon, and a lot of my fears over the last 3 or 4 years have been very wrapped up in being a new parent and kind of what that looks like. And I have a hard time just even dealing with it without bringing those kind of fears into my work and working through them in that format.
Yeah. So, in that respect, how would you deal with that fear in a story? Would you sort of like work it out in the story?
Yeah. So, well, one example is I have a new book coming out in December, actually. It's called Hear the Branches Rattle. And the short elevator pitch, which I haven't totally refined yet, so maybe bear with me a little bit. It's a father who is in a isolated village in Canada, and people who have very, very little contact with civilization. And for the last few hundred years, every year, they walk one of their children out into a clearing, and they sacrifice that. They don't kill them, but they effectively do. They leave them as a sacrifice for the vampiric old gods that live in the woods nearby. And that's kind of how the story opens, is this little girl walking out into the woods, and she doesn't know what's happening, but she trusts her dad, and she's getting more and more frightened as she realizes that he's not here anymore, and he's probably not coming back. And then the rest of the book is him dealing with that guilt of failing her and letting her down, and even actively allowing her to come to harm. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, are you a pantser or a plotter?
I am technically a plotter, but my plots when I plot out a book, it's mostly vibes based at first. It'll be like dark woods here, and then some sort of violence here, and then I kind of slowly work out what's going on. And by the end of the plotting process, I have about 100 words written on a page describing what's going on. So I have a general idea of what's going to happen, but I leave a lot of room. And I kind of fly by the seat of my pants. And sometimes that doesn't work out so well for me. Sometimes I get to the end and I realize that there's some gaping plot hole or something like that that probably would have been caught beforehand. But, you know, the pantsing method, which is about 80% of what I do, I'd say, is pretty much the whole reason that I write anyway, is to kind of have that free spirit where I'm figuring things out in real time, and just kind of letting the characters and the events unfold naturally.
Yeah. Do you find that you sort of like go off at a tangent sometimes?
Yes, I do definitely. In fact, that's probably one of my biggest problems. I am currently working on a collaboration with the author Christopher Bessonen, who I know you did a interview with, a written interview about a month and a half ago. But he sent me roughly, I think it was like 8,000 words of something that a concept we had kind of talked over, and I had planned on maybe expanding it into a 16,000 word novella. And the last time I checked, I was at 67,000 words, and am just kind of entering the third act right now. So definitely prone to some tangents and going off in crazy directions and not knowing exactly how I got there.
You planning to cut any of that or just keeping it all in there?
Yeah, I'm certain that I'll cut a little bit of it, but it is, I would say it's fundamentally a full-length novel at this point. So I might cut a couple thousand words, and I'm sure Chris will probably want to cut a little bit as well, providing he doesn't look at it and go, yeah, actually, this sucks. We're just going to dump this in the trash. But we have a pretty good chemistry together. We just released a short story on godless.com called the Missing Reel, and I think that worked out pretty well. So I don't really have any fears in that regard. But that's definitely an instance where I had a very... I had it mapped out what I was going to do and what I needed to get there, and then I added a character, and things just exploded into, a 2-week project turning into 4 months of writing.
Yeah, it seems a bit of an extension.
Yeah, definitely.
So, what's the hardest thing about writing horror?
For me, I think one of the hardest things is getting you watch a horror movie, and there are these brilliant setups to jump scares if you're watching a good horror movie. It doesn't need jump scares, but there's a good way and a bad way to do it. But essentially, there's these wonderful moments where you see something happen on screen and you feel a chill run down the back of your spine. And I think it's a lot harder in fiction, in the writing format. Now, I do read a lot of horror authors, and a lot of them do that well, but I think that's the most difficult part, is maintaining that kind of slow building suspense and then having it ramp up suddenly and crescendo into something that really sticks with the reader. I think that's probably the most challenging and demanding part.
Yeah. So what's been the most difficult scene that you've ever had to write?
So the most difficult scene that I ever had to write was probably three scenes at once. I did the old three-tiered climax for a book. Kind of, an example of that would be, um, an occasional Star Wars movie will have like a battle in space and a fight down on the ground, and then the Jedi's duking it out in the Death Star, and it's constantly jumping between those, and it has to maintain coherence and pacing. I did that recently in one of my sci-fi books called Cosmic Treason, and it was really difficult to have everything kind of work together where one scene didn't just end and then the other two, dragged on for another 10, 15 pages. That was tough.
Okay. So can you share any memorable feedback, good or bad?
Yeah. Some of my favorite feedback. I'll start with the negative ones first, because I actually do think that they're valuable. I released a novella a couple years ago called Coldwater Forest, and it's a pretty strange one. It's your classic cabin in the woods setup, and things kind of go awry. But the ending is very ambiguous, and there's a lot that's kind of left to your own interpretation. And going through and reading a couple of the reviews on there were really spectacular, because they said exactly what I was going for. Where they're like, this doesn't make any, I don't understand what's happening here. Where if I was a reader, which I am, but if I was looking for a book and I saw those kinds of reviews, I'd be like, yeah, this is where it's at. This is what I'm going to get this. So that's been good. Positive, there have been a couple times where I will log into Facebook and pop into one of the various, horror or reading groups that I'm in and see a review posted by somebody in there of something that I wrote them, us having never interacted, and seeing them act, with genuine honesty about the thing they read and recommending it, and not knowing that I'm even in the group, so they're not hoarding my attention or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's really fun to see that, and then I've been pretty overwhelmed with the positive response from people that will, when other people are looking for recommendations, they'll suggest one of my works, and that makes it very, very real for me. I always knew, not always, but like over the last decade, that I would be a writer, but I never knew I would have readers. I guess.
You don't know, do you, when you first start out? You don't think anyone's going to read your book.
Right. That's my assumption, was that no one would, and I was just going to be plodding along over here alone, which would be fine. But yeah, it's
And then
pretty
when you get that first review, you're like, really? Did you read my book?
Right. You're skimming through it to be like, okay, do they have the details in here? Did they read it? Is this some fake elaborate trick? Yeah.
So do you ever feel any remorse to the readers for the scares or the discomfort that you put them through?
Yeah, I do sometimes. I would say there have been things I've written where it'll take place 2/3 of the way through the book, and I'm like, man, this isn't for everyone. I'm gonna lose some people here, I think. And I know trigger warnings are a big topic of debate right now, and I'm generally for them, but it's kind of difficult to navigate without simultaneously setting up expectations and that sort of thing. So it actually completely shifts the way that your book is received. So I haven't quite navigated that balance yet, but yeah, I'm sure there are people who have had certain negative experiences to the things I've written. When I was just starting out, I had one or two of my books in KDP or Kindle Unlimited. And when you only have a couple, readers at that point, you can see how many page reads you got in a day. And sometimes you can tell, like, oh, I seem to, every once in a while, I'll have this amount of page reads in a day, which means they read to a certain point and stopped. And once you begin to see like a general page range consistently show up, you realize that they're all stopping at a certain point. and they're opting out, which is totally fine. But yeah, I also my wife will proofread my stuff, and she's generally not a horror person, bless her heart. So she will leave comments occasionally, and there was one in I have a short story collection called Crimes of the Blood Cults, and she highlighted a particular scene and left a comment there that just said ick. I was pretty pleased with that, so yeah.
So have you got any exciting projects that you're currently working on?
Yeah, this year was a year where I decided I was going to knuckle down and write 1,000 words a day, hell or high water, and ended up writing 4 books. And now I'm starting to edit them, and that is always a process. It always takes longer than I think it will. But the aforementioned collaboration that I'm doing with Christopher Besonin, I'm hoping comes out next year at some point. I'm also finishing up a sequel to one of my better received books called The Omen Tree. Sequel is called The Viperverse. That should hopefully be out summer of next year. And yes, I also have a novella coming out this December called Hear the Branches Rattle, which is that one about the isolated village in the woods.
Yeah, fantastic. Sounds like you're going to have a very busy few months.
Definitely. Yep. It's very exciting. I like to keep busy. I if I don't get my 1,000 words in, I feel like I'm dying now. So I kind of have to stay busy.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
So what advice have you got for aspiring writers who want to break into the horror genre?
Yeah. I got a couple things that I usually tell people. I think the most important one is to, and this has been said 1,000 times, but to read a lot. Read as much as you can. Read the books in the genre you're writing. Read books outside of the genre, so you can it helps to kind of get that like photo negative, of what you're planning to write, to figure out what people aren't doing, in other genres.
Yeah.
I spent the first 6-7 years of my adult life wanting to be a writer, just reading, basically. And that builds up your instincts for whether something works or not. So I would definitely say do that, read as much as you can. And another big aspect is to keep in mind that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Um, you know, some people treat it like a sprint. I go online and I see people releasing a book a month. The people there are some folks in the 20 books to 50K group, if you're familiar with that. They're writing, a book a week. Sometimes they're just cranking them out, and that's tough. That's not for everyone. That's a very, very small minority of people. And I see people try to do that. And then when they get burnt out and when they see that it's not immediately making, 5 figures in their first year, they've decided that they failed and they quit. So yeah, I would say just start writing, keep it steady. A daily word count is pretty helpful. That way you don't lose track of your plot threads and your character motivations and all that stuff. And then finally, this is probably my biggest weakness, is community is key. Connecting with readers and authors and doing it in a way where you're not just trying to sell books, but you're actually interested in what's happening with these people, what's happening with the books that are coming out, what's the topic at the moment, and treating them as people, not as marks, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I agree with the everybody should go at their own pace.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, as you say, you do get burnt out if you're trying to copy someone else's pace.
For sure.
And if writers are in this to make the money in the first year or so, then they're going to be very disappointed because it's not a quick fix.
Right, totally. It's pretty tough to make a living writing. I think it can be done. There are 2 things that I tell myself that are in direct contradiction with each other. I say, on one hand, I am destined to be the best writer and have 1,000 fans, and there's no way that's not going to happen. And then on the other hand, I say, but if it doesn't, that's okay.
But it is right.
Yeah, you have to kind of live in the tension between those 2 things. You have to simultaneously believe that you can do it, while also you can't be crushed when it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, very true. So where can we find your books?
Yeah, so I have, Amazon obviously is where a lot of my stuff is. I also have paperbacks in pretty much all of your normal paperback outlets, the Barnes & Noble. I believe I have some on, floating around on secondary markets like thrift books and stuff like that. I have a couple titles on iBooks and or Apple Books. I don't know what it is. I don't use it. Some people do. And then I also have a title on Godless that's it's called The Missing Reel, and plan on releasing more on that platform in the future. That's a great community full of very supportive people, and Drew, who runs it, has bends over backwards to do what he can for the community. So that's pretty good.
Fantastic. Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show, Fredrick. So thank you for taking my message and accepting the offer.
Yeah, thank you. It was great talking to you today.